So Elizabeth, yes, that's my name, though I was better known by the label they gave me, barren one. So now you know it all. That's me. 2 dreadful words. I'm a desert. Nothing could grow inside of me, only shame and bitterness, and I was very sad. I'd lost something that, of course, I never really had. But as you know, I'm not the only one around in the Hebrew Scriptures who couldn't have kids. But let me back up. Why this was so awful was where and when I lived. As a woman, that was what you did. That defined you. It meant, though, I was always on the outside of a group of people. I couldn't talk about how little Abe, or even Sarah, though boy children were the prize. I couldn't talk about how my precious little one smiled up at me or told funny stories about how they nearly pulled Dad's long beard out. And they'd brag about how their kid was working in the family workshop, only 4 years old, a bit ahead of his time. My dear husband, Zach, he was kind, but I must say he wasn't good at just hearing me. He wasn't a good listener. He'd chatter on and make things okay and encourage me that I was worth way more than any son to him, even 10 sons. I did try to point out, though, that sometimes it felt as if I did have 10 sons, trying to tidy up after him, and never have any peace from all his chattering. But I still didn't bloom as I should have. But he's a good man. Over the years, I had long conversations when I went to temple with Yahweh. And in the early days, I thought about Hannah. I thought about her a lot. She was like me, barren. But God gave her the son she prayed for, though I used to think it was really strange that she made a deal with Yahweh to give him up if she got him. She promised she'd give him up to serve in the temple, to serve God. I struggled with that. Why pray for something really hard and bargain that if you got it, you let it go? But for us women in those times, I tell you, it was better to have given birth and let him go than actually not have had anyone to let go of. I cried too, like Hannah. Many people must have thought I was crazy just like that. She was so upset that people used to think she was drunk. She'd be weaving in and out of the temple after she'd been in and talked to Yahweh. But I tried not to show that I was upset. I would live in hope each month. But no, every month I bled, went through the time of monthly impurity. Yet again, everyone, it seemed, could make babies. They'd just pop out, except me, just like pies out of a hot oven, one by one by one. At one time, it felt like I may as well die. I couldn't do what I needed to do. Nobody understood. They just said it would happen sooner or later. But years on, they stopped saying that. And in the end, my monthly course just dried up. And I knew inside of me that I was done. Not even a whisper of hope now. Hope died. I felt sad and angry all over again at Yahweh. Well, actually, I simmered very quietly because I wouldn't have wanted Zach to have seen me like that. Not really angry. He'd have got so upset for me and for us. So I had to do what I think you would now call inner work. I had to look what was happening inside of me, apart from growing a baby, because that wasn't happening. I guess that was the only thing I could do, apart from drink more wine or scrub my house even cleaner than it was, but I think I prefer to do inner work than doing that. Oh dear, so I had to let all my disappointments go, all my dreams, all the plans that I had for my life. You know, I'd have a husband, and then I'd have one boy, and then I'd probably have, well, actually, I'd probably have 10. That I would raise them up as priests. They'd serve in the temple, just like Zach did. No, actually, we get a couple of stonemasons and a couple of carpenters. And the carpenters would help because we'd have to build a bigger house to fit everyone in. I'd have a couple of girls. That would be lovely, actually, and they could help me in the house, with all the stuff that I had to do. Then we'd find 10 boys. If they were 10, men, then we'd have 10 beautiful, godly women, and I'd have grandchildren. Stop, for goodness sake, woman, stop. I don't know if any of you get me rambling on, if you've got stuff like that for you. Dreams never came to be. Hopes, imaginings that maybe you never even told anyone. And now you're past it, beyond hoping. Maybe it's that child of yours, maybe he's turned out to be a bit of a bad un, or your loved one that went with somebody else, or the injury, that injury that changed your life totally. I'm sure you've got stuff just like me. Certainly people in our village went through some of that, not least poor Matthew. He was climbing up a ladder, trying to mend a roof, and he fell off. And he left poor Mary look after the kids and do all the weaving. She had to do it all by herself. Oh boy, they had struggles. Anyway, I think a part of me did have to die. I did have to let go of all my hopes of my life. I had to give it all to Yahweh, somehow knowing that Yahweh cared, really cared. I think in that dying and the letting go of my dreams, I had to accept that doing whatever everyone around me and where I lived, the village, thought I should do, wouldn't make me any more loved by Yahweh. He loved me anyway, as much as he ever could. I knew Zach believed that already, bless him, though I had to keep telling myself that I was okay and loved. But then once I got to see that I needed to let go of my dreams, you see, I realized I was being asked another question. What do I really want to give birth to? What do I want to be pregnant with? For the good of the world? For Zach? For me? For Yahweh? As time went on, I had a feeling in my waters, deep down, that the answer to that question would take some time. But I did know some basic things that I wanted to grow that are so hard to grow, like kindness, patience, self-control, gentleness, love, peace. I could begin to see that I needed to sow some new seeds and let Yahweh do some work inside of me. I remember noticing olive trees at the back of our house with their ripe olives loading the branches. These are some of my friends that were picking them. They began as tiny seeds, though, these olives, hidden, that were put in the ground, and eventually they'd come to birth. So I began to see that producing good fruit in me was much more like birthing a baby. That's what the long 9 months is all about. Gets you ready. So I think it could be taking a lot longer to make good stuff like that in me, maybe a lifetime. But Yahweh would still be there all the way along loving me. Well, that reminds me of a story. A Roman soldier told Zach once that there was a strange animal with like a nose so long that it came down and touched the ground. I teased Zach that he's got a long nose, but oh my goodness, this creature had larger ears than Nathaniel next door, bless him. And this being's baby takes 2 years to grow. Who would have thought? They're probably a bit of a myth, though. I've never seen one. So, 9 months, 2 years. There's a lot of growing to be done before whatever it's born comes into being. So that thought helped me think about, well, what did I need to do to make good things grow inside of me, rather than be a bit down, a bit unkind, a bit selfish, a bit full of me? And women who are in the family way, they do a lot of different things to help that seed grow healthy and strong. I notice, because I notice these things, that women in the early days, they sit down a lot, sitting by the well a lot longer than they used to. They take more time to do things. They slow down. I think they're listening to what's happening in their body. They make space for what's growing, and they clear out, I can tell you, a lot of stuff they don't need to make space and get ready for the new. They ask other people to help them as well, no longer do all the heavy lifting, and their men get a bit annoyed with that because they have to do more work. Yeah, they also care what they put into their bodies, I can tell you. I've noticed what some women do. They water down their wine, and I think, oh, I know what's happening to you. And that's when I begin to think, yeah, you're pregnant with something. So I came to realize that if I wanted to bring something good into the world, I had to change a few things. Maybe I needed to sit down a bit more often. Maybe I needed to slow down, be a bit more comfortable with just what was. I had to stop listening to old Susanna in our village. She'd just sit around the well all the time and jabber on about this, that, and the other, and it was always about somebody else, and sometimes not quite so kind. So instead of sitting on my mat and looking at the space between where Zach and I slept, where the baby would have been, I began to do other things. I visited poor Simonson. His wife was sick and died, and he has 3 little ones to care for. And I had to keep going over what I'd lost, a son, or 10, either way. And I had to think about good things. So I had to just stop talking about stuff with me, going on about it. Mind you, Zechariah, dear love, he did help and encourage me to do that. He told me just to let it go, to focus on something else, like thinking of what I could do with all those lemons on my tree. But I confess, he'd give me so many ideas that, let's not tell too many people, but once I did a very unwifely thing. I just told him to be quiet. It was a bit scary, but he was okay, because he loved me. Ah, dear. Well, I began listening to other people's stories. I began to settle in and stop thinking about what I was going to say next, and not just talk about me and say the same thing over and over and be an echo chamber of what I was always saying to myself. I'd talk actually a little bit more about what was happening to me, what I was realizing, the growing awareness of what I was realizing I needed to do more of. Usually it was Zach who did the talking for both of us, but I began to get a word in edgeways. And then, after all that preparing, then comes the birth. Now that's the real letting go process, and I've helped with a few of those now. And of course, we never know exactly how it will all turn out. Just like life. But somehow, we live on, we pick ourselves up, we begin again and carry on. Find a new kind of life with what we have, knowing that Yahweh is here now. That's all I needed to know. So I slowly focused on a new way to be, very different to what I could have imagined. And it took time, but Yahweh gave me gifts and friends and things to do and be that I couldn't even imagine, and so much joy. But then I got pregnant. Who would have believed it? Just when I'd done all this hard work. Gosh. That was hard. I was old by then, but wow, that was amazing. Not exactly what I'd planned. I couldn't exactly run around after little John then, but God lightened the places of my disgraces. I like that, heard that somewhere. I was visibly pregnant when my young cousin visited. I was kind of like out here. Crazy story about her, but that's not for now. My wild child, as he became to be known, he kicked me so hard when she walked in, newly pregnant, nearly doubled me over. I guess that was a rehearsal for how things would be between the boys when we met as families. They were always tussling. Very different ways of looking at Yahweh and the world now, and how to bring peace. God knows we needed peace. When they were playing with their friends, if 2 kids were fighting, John would be for dragging them off and making them say sorry and kick them out of the game. Jesus, he was an odd one. He'd be up for asking them what was going on. And he'd show them a bit of compassion, be a bit kind. My John was not known for that. And it would often turn out that one of these kids came from a tough spot. Not that Jesus would be a pushover, mind, but then he'd help the 2 kids who were fighting to get along. He'd bring peace and bring them together again. Funny that. You can imagine, though, around the dinner table with our 2 families, it was sometimes very tricky. Gosh, the kids were as different as ground-up corn and sweet, juicy pomegranate. And we parents had a few tense discussions about how you should raise your children. I think I knew best, but Mary, well, she's the younger generation. You know what they're like now. Probably because the lads were just so different. But you know something? Us 2 couples, Joseph and Mary, me and Zach, we both lost our boys really early on before we were put in the ground ourselves. Remember, I was intrigued about how Hannah gave her son up. Well, Zach and I ended up doing the same, didn't we? John, Interesting, his name meant gift. That was a good reminder, for he was a wild one. He liked wearing leather right from the beginning, and not a lot else, I can tell you. And he made little tents of sheepskins that he slept in the yard, and then he left home really early to go and live in the desert. I mean, it wasn't a night, it wasn't like the beach, it was a desert, it was awful, with lots of other people like him, and he felt that was what God had told him to do, Yahweh. So guess what I had to do again? Let go, yet again. I learned it's never a one and a done. Got to do it all the time. Got to let go. Got to keep surrendering. I had to let go of my control over my kid and my future just when I thought we were all settled and sorted and done and I might have the grandchild. I think it's all part of that letting go thing that we have to keep doing until the big let go, which is death, I guess. And it's ironic because once again, I was the centre of all the gossip in the village. Oh, she's the one who can't have children. And then it was, did you hear about her crazy son? Fancy letting him live in the desert and fancy letting him wear that. Oh, my goodness. But then, well, this really is hard to say. John was put in prison. I used to take him food. And they took his head off. Thanks to that wicked wife of Herod. She was a scheming... Don't get me going. I've got to let that go too. Oh, my life. But I kept peace with Yahweh. I've learnt there's no holding on to anything. Nothing's forever. But I do know that Yahweh lightened my disgraces, that Yahweh comforted me. I learned to live with what I had in my hands, crooked and gnarled as they are, being thankful for what I have right now. And I also trusted that me and dear Zach were part of a bigger story and that Yahweh was being kind to me, wrapping a kind story around me. So that was Elizabeth. Hope you enjoyed that. Now speaking as Anna, I don't know what feelings were stirred up in you this morning. Sometimes telling your story can disturb others, and I'm wondering if maybe Elizabeth's story has unsettled you. Actually, a friend of mine, when I was pregnant, Maggie, with my first child, ended up in a psychiatric hospital. My joy was her undoing. So if anything has unsettled you, take it to Yahweh. Speak it out, write it out, and find his kindness wrapping around your story today too. Scripture can be read in many different ways, and as one commentator wrote, because so many women in Israel couldn't have children, we read of at least 7 in the Bible, I think. Maybe the lesson is don't drink the water in Israel. Take it very literally. Some say that the passage we read today is really about praying hard enough, both for Hannah and Elizabeth. Then if you pray hard enough, you'll get your prayers answered. But how many prayers is enough, right? But at a deeper level, maybe there's a symbolism here. We all have a choice to give birth, not to babies, but to something that's good. So what do you want to be pregnant with? Do our encounters in life with others, Yahweh, God, bring about any of the things that Elizabeth wanted? Love, peace, joy, self-control. What do we want to give birth to? And that depends, as she suggested, what we feed and nurture in the silent places when we're on our own, inside of us, in the darkness, in the womb, if you like, actually. So like Elizabeth, what do you feed on? Is it social media, TV, adverts saying you need the next gadget, the next thing? The news with all its drama, politics, gossip, scandal? What you feed on, you see, it's a negative feedback loop. You'll be fed even more of the same thing. The computer is very clever. It understands you, it knows you very well, and it feeds you. Have you noticed if you click on something, you suddenly get more adverts or news articles, and you think, wow, this must be meant to be. I do need to get that new XYZ because it's come up again. No, it's the computer. So what you listen to, even if it's people's negativity, hopelessness, you'll feel down too, I can guarantee it. Because what you listen to, what goes in, will be born in you. And there's only one birth canal. Only one thing can come out at a time. So we need to be careful and thoughtful about what we give our attention to. So as we sing and hear the words of carols, the one that is O Little Town of Bethlehem that we sang earlier, be born in us today, I hope the refrain, what do I want to give birth to in my life, will remain a question that you chew over and come back to often. I'm going to close just with a little prayer that Ronnie's mentioned, this guy, Pedrigo Tuma, an Irish guy. And interestingly, when Ronnie asked me to speak about Elizabeth, this was day 3 that I read on the day that he asked me to speak, and it's all about Elizabeth. It's like, ooh, what you think of, you feed and you get back, I don't know. But anyway, so this is what the prayer is that I pray for all of us today. God of Elizabeth, when Elizabeth heard news of joy, she celebrated, not because she was part of an important story, but because a kind story had wrapped itself around her, and the disgrace she had endured was lightened. Lighten the places of our disgraces, lighten them. Wrap yourself and your story around us, because you can be the great story that surrounds us. Amen.